While many printers have shifted their focus, Freeport Press has remained committed to the art of print. For companies that need a printing partner for magazines, look no further than Freeport Press. We offer the capabilities a customer would expect from a national printer while offering the level of customer service clients expect from a family-owned business. Freeport Press. We do print, and we do it well.
freeportpress.com.
That's the thing with magazines. You want to give something interesting to your readers that they would not see otherwise. What can I do here that they would be surprised? How can I surprise them? How can I put something in their hands that when they sit there and they go, oh, I didn't see this coming. There's a sense of discovery. That's quite wonderful.
Despite its name, Direction of Travel is not a travel magazine. Sure, it's a celebration of a certain kind of travel, but this is not a publication that takes you somewhere, unless you think of Airworld as a destination, which I do. Founder Christian Nolle is an AvGeek, which is not an insult, more an acknowledgement of a state of mind. Christian loves all things aviation, and mostly he loves how it looks and feels, and perhaps more importantly, how it looked and felt. Direction of Travel is a loving homage to route maps, in-flight entertainment, ticket offices, and airports. It is a magazine about the culture of flight and the aesthetics one finds in Airworld. And for anyone with even the slightest interest in flight, it is a glorious and loving celebration of that world. Regular listeners of this podcast may have noticed that I've been speaking to quite a few people from travel magazines recently, and there are reasons for that. One could argue that no other type of magazine has had to weather such a variety of competition from the digital space. And travel itself is subject to forces that have nothing to do with travel itself. But it remains aspirational, even to those lucky enough to travel often. So whether you're a frequent flying business person or someone who might fly once in a while, the magic of liftoff and touchdown remains. Just a note about this episode, I had some technical issues, so I don't sound so hot. Like if this was a flight, it would have suffered a major delay, or maybe even would have been grounded. But hey, this is Arjun Basu, your captain speaking, and we thank you for choosing to fly with the full bleep. The background to this is that we had a bit of a flight delay, and that joke will get funnier as we talk. So tell me about, before we talk about the magazine itself, tell me how you got to the point where you said, I'd like to make a magazine about flying.
I'll try to condense it down a little bit. So my background is in photography, but I spent the last 25 years building things online. So I've been basically have a digital design agencies. We build websites. And at times that can feel soul destroying because you spend years building something and then somebody pulls the plug and it's just gone. There's no history to these things. And then parallel to all that, I accidentally started collecting maps, airline maps. And that was purely just by accident. I saw these beautiful things and I thought, hey, these look great. And obviously eBay is amazing for that stuff. And I just started buying up bits and pieces that I really enjoyed. And that slowly accumulated, but never like thinking, oh, I'm going to do anything with it. It was more like, I've always been a little bit of a collector. Over the years, they just add on, and suddenly you're looking at these big piles of stuff and going, what can I do with this? And I love flying. I'm what you would call an AvGeek all the way through. Aviation, flying is my sort of passion. Some people might say it's an obsession. And then it came to a point when I was thinking, I got all this material and I felt like there was nothing out there. The print world's a funny place. There's lots of niche publications, but there wasn't anything, they ever done anything in that genre, I thought. There was magazines about the news of aviation or about the heritage of aviation or about people's small planes, that kind of thing. But there wasn't anything that sort of talked about the culture and the visual history. Most of that stuff seemed to appear in big coffee table books. And so I thought there might be a little bit of a gap there. And I like magazines. I subscribe to tons. So I would like to contribute something back into the world.
Yeah, aviation is such a visual medium, and where it comes from. And we're going to talk about the past a little later. But how was the magazine assembled? A lot of it is probably material that you have collected or bought on eBay, but there's also a lot of archival. Not all of it can come from you, can it?
You would be surprised. I have quite an extensive collection. I've been in touch with other people as well. I spent quite a lot of time at the British Airways Speedbird Centre, it's called. So at the headquarters at Heathrow, it will be demolished when the third runway ever goes ahead. It's quite ironic. They have this sort of building within a building, basically, which is essentially their sort of enormous archive. And it's this amazing place of just like aircraft models. And the people who work there are all, they've been with the airline and now they're just volunteers to look after the archive. So I had spent quite a lot of time going through all that stuff, and some of it has been used in previous volumes. So that's one of them. And then more and more recently, I've also just opened up to getting contributors to come on board. Magazine work is hard, and it's a funny world because you make them and then you put them into the world, and you never really know what people are going to make of them. You get a little bit of feedback, but when you do it by yourself, you just don't know what works and what doesn't work. There's no way of measuring it.
Yeah, so because each of your issues has a themed and had the issue on the British Airways, and then you had the issue on, you called it Over the Alps, but it's really about Swiss. And you had the great issue on aviation in Africa. So that's what I'm wondering. Do you just all of a sudden notice, like, oh, I have all these beautiful maps of Africa, I should do an issue? Or is it driven by interest as opposed to material on hand?
I think it's a real mixture between interest and material because the two have to work together. And I spend a lot of time thinking, what can I add to this in a way that nobody else is doing? Because you want to put something out, you don't want to do it, it's already oversubscribed or saturated. You want to add something to the conversation that feels new or a new angle or interesting in a way that hasn't been done before. So often it's a mixture between the two. And it's also, hey, that's a great story. Like for instance, I've spent years of being interested in aircraft stowaways. So I built a website years and years ago. I made this interactive map online. So these are people who've been hiding inside the wheel bay of an aircraft and who've either survived or fallen out. Or it's
So
been some amazing.
amazing, some of them made it.
Yeah, it's the most extraordinary stories. Also because they're stories of individuals. When you normally hear about people trying to make it into a country, it's like it's lots more. Here it's always individuals. So zoom in on them, and there's some interesting stories there about these incredible people who've survived. And also, obviously, often there's been cases where one has survived and one has died. So I spent a lot of time on that. And then I thought, a lot of these people came from Africa flying into Europe. So I thought that would be a natural fit for, let's say, the Africa issue. So that's how it works. It's like often these long running side projects that somehow I think maybe they can slide into the magazine. Because magazines, for me, they're like a little container of ideas. You work out, what can I put in here? What works? So does this work in the sort of overall scheme of things, or what do I need to go out and get to make it work as a printed object?
The maps are gorgeous. As someone who loves maps and air world in general, I could spend hours and hours on the maps and the old stuff, the vintage stuff. It's just very rich. So what can we learn from the past in terms of even what aviation has meant? Because it's obviously a different industry now, even though it still does the same thing. It still takes you from one place to another, but it was different in the past.
It was an experience. I suppose it's the whole thing from the get-go was, well, that's the funny thing is it's still an experience. I love when I get into a plane now, I'm really excited about it. I want to sit in the window. That kind of excitement never really going to go away. Even after X amount of flights, you go, I'm still going to sit in the window because you never know what you're going to see. And I love watching over the airfield and having that visceral experience on takeoff and landing. For me, that is the real nitty-gritty, that feeling in your body. But in the past, obviously, there was more of an occasion to it. Now we take it for granted. We just jump on a flight to go whenever we want. It's so easy. Also so accessible. And it's also much, much cheaper than it used to be. I think that's a very big thing too. And I've been thinking about that a lot. And people keep going, oh, it's the golden age of aviation. I like to talk about that. But the golden age was like, you had to have a goal to do it. It was expensive. It was really expensive. And only certain people could do it. You had to be within reach of an airline ticket office, go there, buy your ticket, go to the airport. It's completely outside most people's reach. Now it's different, obviously. What I always think about is trying, how can we make people appreciate it a little bit more? Or at least like it's a really special thing that we get to go flying. And I suppose my magazine in many ways is a love letter to that. Just want to celebrate it. I know, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the environmental aspect as well, but it's an extraordinary thing. And I think that's the sort of starting point for anything that I'm doing is trying to just celebrate that. And it's so visually rich.
I think the only real difference now is that it used to be almost universally aviation was projection of power or soft power and even modernity. And now it's not. Some countries still use it as that. I mean, I can think of all the Gulf airlines. It's definitely that, but it's not that for most airlines. It's that part has been lost, and I think that's part of the reason why it's become such a mercantile affair.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting because if you think back of like how Pan Am was, for instance, Pan Am was such a soft power tool. The early flights working with Aeroflot, getting in the flight between New York and Moscow, that was massive power, soft power, geopolitics at play. And I've always been fascinated by one of my side projects that I keep these sort of rabbit holes I go through. It's the airline tickets offices. It's one of my sort of recent interests, how they were like these networks on the ground and how they provided like a little bit of, again, as soft power as well. And often these offices on the ground would also double as mini embassies. So like Swiss Air in overseas would represent Switzerland, obviously. Same with Lufthansa and so forth. They weren't just selling airline tickets, they were selling an ideal dream.
Well, it was brand.
Yeah.
Airlines were so brand aware when they started, and then they went through especially in North America, where they weren't aware of their brand at all. They were just to get people from point A to point B. And now it's come back a little. I think the last maybe American airline that really cared about its brand was Braniff, and of course they went out of business. But I think that's part of it, is that that's one of the things we lost. Just the architecture, the photos of the airline ticket offices. They are spectacular buildings, and that's just architecture as brand, but there's a national element to it as well, obviously.
Yeah, and now these airlines, there's so few of them are national airlines anymore. Like now they're just privatized or they're part of giant networks. Scandinavian Airlines still represents Scandinavia, and they want to take ownership of that again, even though they're technically not owned by the state. You get on board, it's a Scandinavian experience, or you get on Finnair, it's a Finnish experience. And I think that's a wonderful thing about that. There's still that sort of, obviously, if you get on Ryanair, it's a Ryanair experience or it's an EasyJet experience. It's just a pan-European setup. It's very different. But the national airlines or the previous national, they're now privatized. They still have that.
I know BA has just done a rebrand and it's actually pretty nice. But it just feels like their attention went somewhere else because, as you said, travel got democratized and it became just another way to see the world in many ways. But like you, I hate the airport, but I love getting on the plane.
Yeah. Except the airport experience has become most of the time completely horrendous. But once you get on the plane, you sit down, you go, okay, I'm in my seat now. It's all right. I'm in my natural home. I've spent a lot of time photographing around airports as well. And that's like another thing as well. But also very well aware that you could just be stopped any minute, even though you're walking around fully visible, because events have happened that have led to that kind of alertness.
Yeah. And I mean, looking through your magazines, and with my own past, I mean, I used to edit in-flight magazines. And so I just think about everything that's gone wrong. And one of them is what's happened to in-flight magazines, because the relationship between airlines and print, and I think you make this point in one of the issues, is actually a long history, and that even pilots still had until very recently, and maybe some of them still do, they had printers in the cockpit. And so the relationship between aviation and print is actually quite deep. And part of it was the in-flight magazine. And now not very many airlines do it. And when they do it, they don't do it very well. And I think that's a part of the diminishment, at least to me, and I'm probably sensitive to this because I was in the field, but it just feels another part of the brand experience that has been lost.
And then the excuses they made. I remember like Singapore Airlines was saying, oh, we're going to not do a magazine anymore because we're going to save weight. So we're going to burn less fuel.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Jeremy Leslie at MagCulture. We're proud to support The Full Bleed because we love magazines too. Visit magculture.com and see why print is far from over. It's just getting started. Read the journal for interviews and reviews, listen to our podcasts, visit our shop in London and online, and come to our live events in London and New York. We love magazines. Subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates, all at magculture.com.
Print is Dead is made possible by the support of the Society of Publication Designers. The SPD powers the future of visual storytelling, setting the standard for editorial excellence and shaping the future of visual culture. For more information, visit spd.org.
The weight issue, I remember when I was doing Air Canada's magazine, there was a CEO at one point who could calculate the weight based on how many pages we told him we were printing. The problem he had was that our magazine was so full of ads that we were producing some monster issues. And so when the fuel was cheap, it wasn't an issue. But when it went up, it was an issue. When I was doing the magazine, it was making money for everyone.
Well, that's the thing. And also, you've got a very captive audience, right? And obviously, it's changing now when more airlines are getting internet on board. Before that, you had an incredibly captive audience that sat there with something. Not everybody wants to look at a screen the whole time, might want to read something. It's a great space for reading anyway. I always felt that. And obviously, some airlines have been better at that. There's still some that do some interesting bits and pieces in print, but it tends now to be I think the British Airways magazine is just available in their lounges now. So not on board anymore. And it's only if you're flying business or have access to a lounge do you get a copy of it. And it's a real shame. And the sort of aviation content, so to speak, in those magazines is like at the very end. There's a little map which is so dense with lines. There's a little bit about their fleet, and that's it. But then when an airline turns 100 years old, Lufthansa just published a book celebrating that. They're there right away. They go like, how do we mark this occasion? We're going to publish a book. Of course, we're going to do a book because it's a permanent marker in time. It's not a website. It's not anything like that. It's a book. You can take it home, put it on your shelf, take it out in 20 years' time and go, look at this. And that's beautiful. I love that.
So on their website, you have a bunch of things. You have, as we discussed, the airline ticket offices and they're just gorgeous. I would suggest people go to the site. You have this whole thing on Heathrow's third runway, which is ongoing and has been going on forever. I think it's been talked about since I've been interested in the subject, since I've been in the industry, and it's still being discussed. Although now think it's going to happen, but it's a fascinating thing. I played around with it yesterday, and the polar radar thing. This is really like AvGeek at its highest level.
Yeah, it's part of me. I have these itches to scratch. And so I make these projects thinking nobody else is doing it. So I'm going to do it. And that's how it usually starts. Like, for instance, the most recent one was the ticket office one. But before that, I did one which was basically just the thirdrunway.com, which is basically a website that just tells Londoners, am I going to be impacted by it or not? And that came out of another project we did years ago called Planes Over London, which basically is a website that predicts whether planes will fly over London or not based on the wind direction. And people use it now. It was funny because I did it for myself because I live right under the flight path of Heathrow. And I wanted to know, why are there no planes today? So I did it for myself. But there's a whole audience now. It's got its own kind of people who use it every day because obviously they want to know whether there'll be planes over them so they don't wake up in the morning or they don't get woken up by it. So they want to predict it in terms of their quality of life. Basically, my world is just a world of flying, and these are just some of the projects I do in my spare time when I have a little bit of extra time. The Polar Radar one was like, you have Flight Radar 24, but every time you look at the planes going up north or down south, they go completely mad. So the lines of the flight path don't work anymore because these flight radar applications, they use a Mercator projection, and they can't deal with these polar flights. They're just not made for it. So I was like, hey, I want to know about all these flights that go over the polar because that's interesting because that's what they used to do in the 70s, right? Before the opening of the Russian airspace. And now it's closed again. So now the airlines do it again. They go over the pole. They go in different routes. They don't stop in Anchorage anymore, or anything like that. But so that mix between what's happening right now, what happened in the past, and then put a bit of technology there in the middle to tell some kind of new story.
Nothing from the internet. It's right there on the cover.
Yeah. And then, yeah. I mean, I still hold myself to this, that the material in the magazine came from my archive. That was the kind of starting point. That was the idea from that. I wanted to do something that wasn't born out of an Instagram feed or anything like that. So I wanted the material to originate in the real world. And so that's the starting point for it, just because it's just obviously now you get stuff from archives online. So you could argue that there's some stuff from the internet. You could argue that. But the point was that I was, as much as possible, try to bring something original into the magazine that hadn't been published before, that hadn't been reproduced before, hadn't been eaten up by AI. This was a thing that was a piece of paper of a map in my archive that I would just photograph and then reproduce. Yeah.
Is direction of travel about nostalgia, or is it a comment on the present?
the stuff I have by its very nature is nostalgic. These old maps are designed at a time when people spent effort and money and time to design them. They were designed by the best. There was effort put into these things. I would say it's something I'm very aware of, and I'm also trying not to overdose on it, if that makes sense, because I think there's a danger of going down that road too much. And I have done that, and I'm always kind of trying to pull it back a little bit or doing something. The next issue I'm working on is going in a different direction, where we're trying not to do less of that and more contemporary photography. But again, there will still be some nice map, because I think it's a nice way of bringing things together. And it's also a bit of, people just like them. They're beautiful things. It's also evolving. It's an evolving language as well, of like visual language of how these airlines talk about themselves. But they do love celebrating themselves as well. They really do. But they do it when it fits them. Generally, they're too busy basically trying to survive, because the airline business is brutal. I suppose I'm trying to find that balance between showing some new things, but still reflect on the past all the time, and also think about what we can learn from it as well, which is why I was so fascinated with the whole polar flight thing again. This is incredible. The fact that back in the day, people would give out certificates when they crossed the North Pole. Now Finnair does it. And I was like, great. So on Polar Radar, you can actually go in and you can find the flight you were on, and you can write your name, and it will generate you a PDF file of a certificate you can print out and put on your wall with any airline that crosses the polar region. So again, I was just trying to take that, how do we make it contemporary and how do we make it fun? Print is so good at that. It gives you that space to tell those stories, I feel. My competition in many ways, like, it's not print, but it might be YouTube. Those sort of vlog videos of people traveling around the world. That's great. Watch them, of course. But it's like, I want to do something else in that space that sort of just celebrates their stuff. It doesn't talk about the news, doesn't talk too much, but also I had done a fair bit of like artist projects in there. I had an American photographer called David Rothenberg who photographed people landing in New York, and he managed to capture them basically just as people were looking out. So we have these moments when he's photographing them looking out the window with their smartphone. This little brief moment where there's like both looking at it. They're not looking at each other, but it's capturing each other, kind of thing. So I quite like that. That's one of the things that I'm fascinated with, like how artists have engaged with them, engaged with flying in general, because it's such a rich subject. And that's one of the sort of things that I'm exploring in the next one.
I'm just thinking about the challenges with this project, maybe about all print projects.
I think it comes down to how I can make it work financially. I think that's another thing to consider, because these things take up so much time and print is still expensive and distribution is complicated. Just making it, that's step number one, but you got to make sure it gets into people's hands. I'm always wanting to do some kind of collaboration with an airline itself, or with some kind of thing. That'll be amazing. I have not had the opportunity yet, but some kind of collaboration where I come in and we do some print product together or something like that, which obviously can happen, where I feel like I can add some value as well. There's some interesting things we could do, which is not just video, which seems to be the thing that they do most these days, but it would be nice to do something in print. But I suppose things sometimes tend to start online and then they migrate into a print format, but the print format is usually quite different than the online. Or sometimes something starts on the page and it migrates from the page onto the screen. So I see the two kind of working together in a sort of little ecosystem of just geekiness, I suppose you could call it. But it's just thinking, like, how can it learn from each other and how can they feed off each other? Because I exist in both those universes. I don't exist purely in print or purely online. I cross over, and I feel like it's quite a nice position to sit in terms of trying to create products that can touch different people in different ways and different mediums.
What's your favorite airline livery?
My favorite airline brand is probably the old Eva Air livery. I really like that one. But the old one, not the new one. The old one with a bit of orange in as well. I thought that was beautiful. I'm also quite a big fan of the Tag Angola livery as well. I think that's really lovely. Not the new one again, but the one they had previously. I quite like those. I think they're quite beautiful with their cheat lines and the sort of old schoolness to it.
What about airports? What's your favorite airport?
It's got to be Heathrow, just because it's an utter mess, but also spectacular at the same time. I have this sort of ongoing project where twice a year I walk around the airport with my camera as a way of exploring the area and seeing what's changed and taking some photographs of some planes. And it's obviously evolving bit by bit. Heathrow never stands still, even though they have no third runway. There's still stuff going on. Things are changing all the time. much more subtle. So yeah, that would probably be my favorite. It's just interesting because it's like this sort of melting pot of politics and transport links and what's happening in the UK as well in terms of our position on a global stage and so forth.
What's your favorite airline?
Probably be something like Singapore Airlines. It's been a while, but that's what I'll probably say is a slightly cliched answer. I'll be sitting down in the back and it's a really comfortable ride and the service is great. And you're going through Singapore, which is always great.
What are 3 magazines you would recommend right now?
I'm a monocle reader because I've always been, and they've been a big supporter of my project as well. But the magazines I read these days, I like MacGuffin a lot. And there's a UK magazine called The Defense, which is really good. I really enjoy that. I read the Aperture as well. It's another one, photography magazine that I really enjoy. And then there's the New York Review of Architecture. They're amazing. They're really good. It comes out like 4 times a year, I believe, which is mostly about what's happening in New York about architecture, but it's great. It's really good writing. I was in Hamburg doing like a little stand with my magazine and they were there as well. So they exist in that little world of indie publishers, I suppose you could say.
What about in-flight magazines?
I would have to go to something like things that I really like and have in my archive is the old Air France one review from like 1950s. That's unbelievable stuff. Unbelievable. The other one that's amazing from that period is the Sabena in-flight magazine. They're beautiful things. They're like objects and they also, you're looking at that, they would cover, like Sabena would do this whole issue just on Congo, like Belgian Congo back then. And it's just extraordinary stuff. And the photography is this rich. The printing is this deep black. It's beautiful things. I still try to find some of these issues that sort of arrive half torn to bits, but they're great. I'm trying to think of a present day one. I can't. I think the one I've just come across recently, I just got a copy of, was the old Virgin Atlantic in-flight magazine called Carlos. But what's interesting about Carlos, it's got no aviation content whatsoever.
That was Jeremy Leslie, our friend from Mag Culture. Carlos was the best in-flight magazine ever. It was the ideal. We were so jealous of it back where I worked. It was a pure reading experience.
I think that's the thing with magazines. You want to give something interesting to your readers that they would not see otherwise. So I'm more like, what can I do here that they would be surprised? How can I surprise them? How can I put something in their hands that when they sit there and they go, oh, I had this, I didn't see this coming. But there's a sense of discovery that's quite wonderful.
This has been The Full Bleed, a podcast about the future of magazines and the magazines of the future, and a production of Magazium LLC. This episode was produced by Patrick Mitchell. The theme music was composed and played by Jason Camelot. If you'd like to comment on this show, send an email to hello@magazium.co or visit our website at magazium.co, where you can read transcripts of all of our interviews from all of our podcasts, along with portfolios, archival photos, links, and more. You can also tell us what the mags you miss. Just fill out the form on the website. Once a month, we'll select the name of a lucky person, and they could win some fine swag. Speaking of which, we have a swag shop. My name is Arjun Basu. Thanks for listening.